Over to you, Aidan.
Brilliant, thank you, and thanks everyone for coming on a fairly, actually no, it's quite sunny. I was going to say a grey morning. So I'm Aidan Hancock. I'm Group Chief Information Officer for Network Rail. So what does that mean? It means I'm in charge of IT and technology. I've got sort of 700 plus people work for me. And what does Network Rail do? We run the railway. So we don't actually drive the trains or run the trains. Other companies do that, but we run 21,000 miles of train track. We run the biggest stations, and we make sure all of that keeps working so that we can get people and goods around the country. So I haven't always done that though. This clearly is not Network Rail. So this is me. In a previous career, I worked for BP for 12 years. Before that, I worked in broadcasting for 8 years. Doing a range of things. The reason I've shown this is not because my trousers are too short, but they are, and it was boiling hot that day. It's the Iraq desert. That's an oil well behind me. And I don't know if you can see, there's two sensors poking up on the right-hand side of the screen coming off the oil well. And that was 10 years ago, and that's just an indication of sources of data that businesses and people and societies need. And once you realize the value of them, you can start collecting more and more and more. So that was quite early. That was collecting data on pressure and temperature. But even simple variables like that, you can start to do some really quite clever things in how you optimize the workings of a vast, great network of, in this case, oil wells and pipelines and so on. This goes back to around about 1830, 1840. It's a drawing because photography hadn't been invented. I like to say that the person on the left in this picture, who's operating a telegraph, is the first IT worker in the world. This is the railway in around about 1840. The telegraph was brought in as the first piece of technology to not automate, but help make signaling better. You can see the signal person on the right there working the levers. This is another example of data has always been generated since far earlier than we would have thought, since long before we had computers and ways of dealing with it. And where data is generated, we can start trying to do things with it. We can manipulate it, we can codify it, we can start reporting with it, we can create something interesting and hopefully something valuable. This slide, what I'm trying to do with this slide is, one, it shows the totality of what I in particular do. It also shows that technology, tech, data, it's not all about the tech, it's not all about the data. In fact, those things tend to be the tip of the iceberg, quite literally in this picture. The bits underneath the iceberg are the bits that we also need to focus on because that's where most of the value comes from. So, yeah, what am I talking about? Well, we can focus on doing something smart with data and solving a problem. But if people don't want to use it or they don't quite understand it, or you can't communicate with them clearly what the value is and what you're talking about, they probably won't use it. And I speak with a lot of experience on this. Just because something makes utmost sense to me or you, and it's obvious we should do it, it doesn't mean other people will necessarily think that. So yeah, things like culture and mindset near the top there are important. Things like leadership and how you actually bring people with you and you tell stories and weave the narrative about what you're trying to do. Customer experience matters a lot. You can do the most fantastic thing in the world and expect people to use it. But if it's horrible and ugly and clunky, they won't use it, right? They want to use something that looks nice. This, I think, is self-evident, and it follows on from that. Data science is a team sport, right? Most things are. Most human activities, especially when you work for companies or organizations, it's a team sport. You require lots of different people. So I'm trying to emphasize that, well, the tech, and I've got a tech background, and I love technology, but what I love more than that is what can you do with it, right? Because by itself, it doesn't really do anything. But if you can solve some problems in a meaningful way, make people's lives better, or generate more profit, or in my case, make the trains run more on time and have less unplanned problems, that's the biggest part of this. So yeah, we need We need deep technical specialists, but we also need people who can translate that and people who can talk about that and tell a story that actually gets other people to buy into it. Because, you know, at times we'll all find ourselves doing things which are tremendously exciting and we understand them, but most other people won't. And I speak with some experience. I spend a lot of time with chief execs and board members and presenting to them rather like I'm presenting to you now. And you have to talk in a different language. You have to speak in a way that people can understand, and you've got to bring them along for the journey. I'm going to give a couple of examples of data science. These are topical because I had them presented by our chief data scientist to me this week. And this is just to give you a flavor of some of the things we do in Network Rail. So this first one, I don't know why it's called Graphic, but it is. Some of the names are a bit strange that people come up with. And what this is around using new technology to inspect and make more timely decisions on things that are going on in our environment. So you can see, yeah, it's around detecting risks, about managing those risks in the infrastructure a bit better. But there's other aspects in there as well. I think the next slide explains it a little bit better. So what the team are trying to do with this one, I'm especially impressed because I didn't know that the iPad Pro now has a built-in LiDAR sensor, meaning you can use light to kind of map, like radar, map the entire environment in an astonishing level of detail. So what that means is we can give our inspectors and our engineers, and we give them thousands of mobile devices as it is, we can give them these ones. They can build a map of the environment around them in near real time. Machine learning to some extent and artificial intelligence can take place within the app on the iPad to make some initial decisions. Then it gets streamed to the cloud. Then we can piece it all together and actually make much faster, much quicker and much better decisions. The examples you'll notice, that doesn't look like a train track. It's not. It's Nick, my chief data scientist. It's his front garden. He was just testing it out, and he wanted to show this to me. So this is brand new technology. This is amazing to me, and it will change how our business works because it means we'll be able to tackle things 10, 100 times quicker, which means we'll have less faults and less problems because we'll be aware of them much more quickly, which means ultimately that the trains will run more on time. Because the big thing for us is, yeah, if you have something go wrong, if you have a piece of track get faulty, or if you have something break down, it's better if you can predict that, take it out of service before it breaks down, and that way you don't impact anything else. This is another example. These are just photos. So this is around vegetation management, which is a big topic on the railway. So if you look at the photo on the left, you can see train tracks running pretty much down the center, top to bottom. And the colors around that are trees. And what this piece of work is doing is it's taking a number of data sources, in this case, quite a lot of aerial sources from drones, and it's built models that look at the health of trees. So unfortunately, there are issues with ash. There's a disease called ash dieback, which is progressing through the country and causing issues. And there's a lot of ash, I think estimated at least 500,000 that are right next to railway lines. Now, the issue is if a tree dies or gets sick and starts to shed its branches and so on, that's really quite dangerous because a train can hit it. Worst case, you could get a derailment, but it would more likely than not disrupt service. So what the model can now do is it can map individual trees, and then the red and orange ones are degrees of the healthiness of that tree. I don't quite know the details of how they do that, but they can do it based on leaf size, cluster formation, so on and so forth. And what that means is that our maintenance engineers can target the amber and red trees before they go after the green ones, because we've only got so many people and there's only so many hours in the day. You can't do everything. So how do we manage that? So that's an example there. I'm nearly finished, and then we'll open up for questions. This is a slide around telling the story of what we do in Network Rail, in IT services, data science, and how we're there to help people who run the business, people who run train lines, people who run maintenance, and so on. We're a very big company, it's about 45,000 people. So yeah, this is what I was saying earlier. It's part of selling the narrative, selling the story around why would you want to do this? Because not everyone gets it. Obvious to me and probably obvious to most of you. Why would you want to do this? How will it solve actual problems you have? How will it solve them more cheaply? How will it do things quicker? So this is part of our branding, in effect, on how we do that. And you can also see the vegetation management down on the left at the bottom, some of the other examples I've shown you, and then there are plenty of other things going on, which I can talk about if anyone's got questions about them, although I'm not an expert in data science, I dabble a bit, or I'll probably just leave it there. So this is the final slide. I always throw this into pretty much every presentation I do, because I found it to be universally true with technology, right? Humans always get overexcited about a new technology or a new way of doing things with technology. And that means we expect it to deliver massive change immediately. We don't even know we're doing it, but we do. And it rarely does. So we overestimate what's going to happen in the short term. Then we kind of get disillusioned and forget about it. But actually in the longer term, which might be 5 years, might be 10 years, might be longer, the effect is actually much bigger than what we would have predicted at the start. But we'd already forgotten about it by then. So I always like to throw that in. You will see that through your lives and through your careers many times. Always worth bearing in mind, right? Because it's very easy to get extremely excited about something, but it takes a while to bed it in and get some use from it. So that's it from me, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aidan. That was fantastic. I'm sitting here absolutely astonished. You wouldn't even believe that that technology is even out there.
It is. It's just amazing.
It's crazy. Okay, we'll start with some questions then. So, just going back to you when you were slightly younger, perhaps our participants' age. What did you enjoy at school? So, what were your favourite subjects?
So that's right. So this will sound strange. My favourite subject was history. I think mainly because I really loved my history teacher. He was just fantastic. I loved everything else. And my dad was a scientist. He worked in kind of with chemistry basically. But I ended up going a different route. So when I was at school, I loved history. So then the A levels I did history, economics, politics, and French. And my goal was, I then went to university to start a law degree. And then realized quite quickly that I didn't want to do a law degree. I didn't really want to become a lawyer, which was always my plan. I hadn't really thought it through. But I'd always had a home computer. And I'm talking the 1980s here, the early 1980s. So they weren't very capable. You know, you can see these things in museums. But I always loved programming them. And then when I was at university, I switched from law to history. So I'm a trained historian, which is not as unuseful in a kind of tech industry as you think. I also, this was in the late 80s, I spent a lot of time with the computers that we had at university on the early global network that became known as the internet. And to be honest, that's where I went. So then once I'd finished that and done with the history, I then went straight into IT because it fascinated me and it's what I wanted to do. I think the key point with that is, you know, you can have any kind of education and, you know, maybe that makes me better at presenting things and presenting ideas and telling the story. I was reasonable with technology as well, but that was a long time behind me. I'm just a manager now.
Great. Okay, so if you weren't in your current role then, in your career, what do you think that you would be doing?
I'd like to say I'd have won the lottery, but then that wouldn't make any difference. I'd just have more money, but I'd still want to do something. So if I wasn't in, so I'll take this two ways. So first way, if I was to be able to just stop working today, because, you know, it has its ups and downs, I would look to do things with technology in the social sector. So I'd look to do non-profit things where technology can just genuinely improve people's lives. That's what I'd like to think I'd be doing, because I'm not the sort to just sit back and do nothing. I'd go mad within days. So I think that's what I'd be doing. If I hadn't gone into tech, I probably would have become a lawyer, probably a corporate lawyer working on giant contracts. And I'm not even sure I'd have made it this far. I think I'd have been burned out and worn out because, you know, I know people who are corporate lawyers and they spend their time looking at drafts of contracts that are thousands of pages long. I haven't got the patience for that. Just don't.
I'm with you on that. So how in your what is the biggest project you've worked on so far then within your career?
Depends what you mean by big. So that's the thing, right?
Or your favourite?
My favourite, I'd have to go back to when I worked in broadcasting. So this was 20 years ago. And so I joined a commercial radio group, Radio and Some TV, that then became bigger and bigger, bigger. And you probably wouldn't have heard of it, but it owns Classic FM, Capital Radio, pretty much every commercial radio station around the country. At the time, all commercial radio in Australia, Europe. It was a big, big deal. And I joined with a remit to try and transform. And this is why I love this one. This is going back so far. I mean, 20 years is longer than you don't even look that old, Jess, let alone anyone else who's listening in. But it was basically converging everything we did. So from the early computer networks to the phone networks, but to the broadcast systems as well, all onto the same modern internet-based network. I loved that because we transformed everything, transformed how the DJs worked, transformed how finance worked, transformed how the advertising was carried, all of it. That's what I loved because also I got to do all of it. And also 20 years ago, things were a bit easier. You could just, I mean, the business case, I think it was a one-page of paper and the chief executive said, fine, just don't mess it up, go for it, here's your money. That does not happen very often. Some of the bigger projects, I was involved when I worked at BP with some national scale systems for the country of Iraq, which were huge, sort of £100 million plus in terms of how they account for pretty much, you know, all their revenue from oil and gas, which is pretty much all their revenue. That was interesting for lots of different reasons. Instrumenting one of the world's second largest oil field with sensors and so on. That was another £100 million program. But then some of the things we're doing in Network Rail, they're huge, great programs. The problem I get is I get to lead them and I get to talk about them, but I don't get to do any of it anymore, which is probably why I still favor the one from 20 years ago, because I got to do that, right? Yeah. It was a small team and I got to do it.
Yeah, I see that. So you mentioned you spent some time working over in the Middle East. What was it like working over there? Did you have like a favorite place that you visited?
So I used to run things in BP's Middle East region, which is one of the larger parts of BP, generated about 20% of the group's profits. And I spent a lot of time in Iraq, Iran, a bit of time in Saudi Arabia, a lot of time in Oman, Kuwait. I loved being out there, right? You have to get used to how hot it is. I think the hottest I saw was 54 degrees. We tried to fry an egg on the side of a computer out in the sun. It didn't really fry, but it went solid. But my iPhone kind of overheated after 1 minute of trying to film it. So it shows you how hot it is. I liked Iraq because it's had a terrible history, but the people were lovely. And it was a very social aspect. You went out there for like weeks at a time and you knew everybody and you worked closely with it and you lived with people and you ate dinner with people. So I loved it for that reason. I loved Iran because Tehran was just a fascinating city and the people were so friendly. Again, they've had their troubles as well. And I hope, things improve there. Oman was fantastic. So people are so laid back and so friendly. Oman is like the Middle East crossed with Africa. It's kind of got this East Coast laid back vibe. Really, really nice place. Plus, I could go out there in January, which I used to, because I used to travel out there all the time. I'm still based in the UK, and go swimming in the sea in January. I mean, you can't do that here. I miss that, I have to say. I haven't been anywhere, obviously, like most of us this year. But I loved it. I loved the people. What I loved more than anything is because it's a totally different set of cultures. Every country is a bit different, and it's the Arab world. I learned a vast amount about how different people can be, because we talk about this all the time. But I'm in Network Rail now, which is a UK-based company. Whereas there, I had, my leadership team, I had 10 different nationalities. Mm-hmm. It's so many different people with very different views on things that if you just listen to people, it's amazing what you can learn about. Oh, I never would have thought like that. Never would have thought like that. Some bad, but mostly good. So that's what I love most.
Oh, great. I believe you are an avid beekeeper. Can you tell us more? Why beekeeping?
I don't know how anyone knows that. It's not like I'm active on social media or anything, because I'm not. I do keep bees. I don't know who's asked that. I suspect my wife, but I'm sure she should be doing some work. I am. So I've been keeping bees for about 15 years. We live in the country now, just outside London. We lived in London for years and kept them there. Bees are fascinating, and it's a mistake to ask me about them because I could talk for hours. Because the thing with bees is they're truly alien, right? You know, I'm sure lots of people have dogs and cats. We've got dogs, but you can understand them because they're mammals, and you can kind of work it out. Bees are like nothing like that. They are as alien as you can imagine. If you understand their life cycle and their biology, you know, I told you not to start me on this, but there's you know, several dozen different jobs that bees will do at different stages in their individual life cycle. There's complex, actually, some really interesting sort of decision analytics and data science that goes on between the bees as a whole when they decide what food sources to go for or where they might want to migrate to when they shift nest sites. Fascinating stuff. I've got a whole library of books on it. I don't know who worked out I'm fascinated by bees. To be honest, I don't really like honey. We eat tiny amounts of honey. We just like giving it away to people. The honey's a hassle. I just love having bees. I can see one of the hives from here down the bottom of the garden.
Oh wow, that's fantastic. So it kind of brings us on to the next subject then. Would you say that you are an eco-warrior?
I wouldn't say that because it wouldn't be true, because I don't think I do enough. I think I do all the things I could do, but I'm not out there campaigning in public. I'm certainly not gluing myself to trains and, you know, things like that. Also, I'm a bit old for that. The way, you know, but having said that, I'm not denying climate change like some people still do, which is just nonsense. It's the biggest problem facing us, without a doubt. Where I am on this is minimizing my own footprint as best I can. But I speak as someone who, you know, spent his life on planes when I was in the oil industry, of all things. So I'm kind of making atonement for that to some extent, although that isn't quite what people think, because I viewed it as international development. You know, it was the only income most countries had in the Middle East, particularly Iraq. So kind of had to kind of work with them on that. My footprint is probably as small as it can be these days. And where I get especially excited is I'm not convinced we can turn back the clock. You know, I think we have irrevocably changed the environment. So I get quite interested in, we will then need tech solutions to this. And what on earth can we do there? And that's something I think, you know, when I get to stop working and retire, I'd like to spend some significant time doing. What can we do there, right? There's some big tech solutions like kind of solar shields and kind of aerosol dust in the atmosphere, but there's small tech solutions, you know, not least of which, let's plant 1 trillion trees. That would kind of help. So there's lots of things we could do.
Great. So you sort of touched on it there. Within the so one of our competitions within STATWARS is the climate change challenge, and with that we ask pupils to think of 3 things that they could personally change. So like you say, it's about looking at your own individual habits and what you do and how you can individually change that to contribute to a bigger picture. So we asked them to come up with 3 things that they could change to contribute to sort of decreasing the effects of climate change. What would your 3 things be?
You're putting me on the spot here. So, which is fair enough. One of them is, my wife and I, we've always prided ourselves, we don't just jump in our car. We have a car, we have one car. And we rarely drive it these days. But even before that, our model has always been as minimum as possible. So for instance, you know, we don't do much shopping. We just always have enough stuff. I know there's a different model where lots of people, I see my neighbours doing, seem to pop out several times a day to just pick things up. We never do that. Never do it because it's unnecessary. So, you know, no unnecessary driving whatsoever. Clearly in work, I've been championing things like this with video collaboration as the new way of doing it, which actually could have a significant impact potentially. What else do I do? I think getting involved in something local. So, you know, I'm involved with looking after our local woodland, which is just at the bottom of our road, which involves cutting down dying trees and planting new trees, is not a bad thing. It's very local, it's very small, but just because it's a small thing doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And the last one, I'm only partly joking, but I pay the bills, so it's not very warm in my house because I just cannot turn the thermostat up because I cannot burn the gas. I can't bring myself to do it. Can't be different if I had like a heat pump or something more efficient, but that's a few years away yet.
Great.
What a rubbish answer.
No, not at all, not at all. I fully agree with you. Okay, so what advice then would you give to young budding data scientists, sort of if they're in the initial stages and they don't really know where to begin?
So, and this is the thing, right? Because when I was young, there was no such thing as data science. Yeah, we had statisticians, but very few people did that. I don't think I know anyone from school who went on to do that. Kind thing, the general rule, my number one rule for how my career's worked is I've never been that ambitious. Yes, I've kind of got to the top, and I'm still surprised at that. Because what I did is I chose all of the things I did because they looked interesting, because I thought they'd be interesting things to do. And for me, interesting is a chance to change stuff. Right, that's basically it. And every role has been around that. Now, that's easy for me to say because I'm looking back and I only realized that in the last 10, 15 years. But people can choose jobs based on money, which is probably why I wanted to be a lawyer in the first place, but I'm not really that money oriented, to say the least. So that was a mistake. People can choose it based on they want status, they want to look and feel important, and yeah, that's fine. You can have a career and do well with that, but my advice is you'll be working for 30, 40 years of your life. If you do it right, and particularly with data science and tech in general, you can be doing something that keeps you interested, is fun to do, that you actually like getting out of bed for in the morning. You can be doing that all your life and get paid really well and travel the world and meet interesting people. So that's my number one top tip, right? Focus on, is it interesting? Will it actually bring meaningful change to the world? Ideally.
Great. I think that's great advice. I completely agree with you. Yeah. They always tell you, don't they, when when you're younger and you don't know what you want, just do what you enjoy. And probably about 30% of people actually do something, go into something that they really enjoy.
I know, and imagine doing something for decades of your life that you don't enjoy. That's the beauty of a career in tech. The last thing I think I'd say, well, I think we finish at 11, but I'm happy to go on longer. In Network Rail, we take on a lot of apprentices and a lot of graduates, and I think I'm taking on another 20 most years. So it's an awful lot of people with a chance to work in the digital realm. So data science is analyzing data, but working digitally, doing things, knocking out prototypes really quickly, bit of coding, bit of user experience, design, so loads of roles. We are a great place to come and work.
So what you mentioned briefly there, the apprenticeship and graduate schemes. What are they the main routes into that particular career, or?
No, well, I think they're a particularly good route if you know that you want that sort of career, because you'll get if I look at what we can do in IT for our apprentices and graduates, they get a feel for everything because there's a lot of different roles that go into it. And then they can work out, what do I like, what don't I like? It's also a way to start getting paid when you're quite young, right? Which isn't a bad idea. It's a perfectly valid route. But then, I took a totally different route. I did a history degree and ended up almost randomly doing it. And that worked for me. So, I come back to just work at what you enjoy doing, right? And I know a lot of people, and probably some on this call, and young people I've spoken to, children of neighbours and so on. Lots of people want to be games designers. Well, that's fine, but not everyone can be. There's a whole massive world, and we haven't even really started on it, right? My favourite stat at the moment: companies use maybe 10% of the data they're sitting on, and we're generating more and more and more all the time. It's accelerating away from us. the next generation of what we need to come in and help us work differently as we become truly digital enterprises. And it'll be a fascinating journey. Frustrating at times because big organizations are, but you learn to live with that, right? It's interesting.
Wow. That's a fantastic interview. Probably one of my favorites so far.
Thank you very much. Great. Don't tell me it was the first one, because then, you know.
No, it wasn't the first one. No, we've done quite a few of them so far, actually. But I found that really, really useful. I think there's some really interesting points in there, and the advice that you give is just fantastic. So thank you so much for giving up time in your day to do this.
My pleasure. You see, I enjoy doing this. Do what you enjoy.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, well, I'll leave it there for now then, and hopefully we can do something like this again soon.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It might be the same thing again though. I'll think of something else.
No problem. Thank you so much, Aidan.
Thank you. Thanks.
See you later. Bye-bye.